Happy Monday, everyone! When people talk about the Arkham Quadriology, they often reference it as such. Asylum has the atmosphere, City has the story, Night has the gameplay, and Origins has the boss fights. However, over the last few years, I have seen a growing sentiment that the best boss fights were not in Origins, but in City. At first I wrote this off, but I figure it would be a good idea to see if Origins really does have the best boss fights, especially when compared to City. I won't compare it to Asylum because the boss fights there aren't anything to write home about, and the boss fights in Night are, as Charles Cardy would say, proper wank. So in order to do this, we're going to look at the boss fights between the two games, see how good they are, and then compare them. A natural follow-up question is then, what makes a good boss fight? There's going to be a whole heck of a lot of subjectivity, but to me, there are 3 ways to measure a boss's success. They are 1. Spectacle, 2. Mechanics, and 3. Impact. The spectacle is often left to the visuals. How crazy is the environment? Are there any gimmicks that raise the stakes visually? Things like that. Mechanics specifically refer to how the game tests your knowledge up to that point. A boss fight, and perhaps this is an outdated definition, is a test, often seen at the end of a level, or in this case a legacy dungeon, and it is meant to test your abilities up to that point. Finally, impact is one of the most vague, but it boils down to what kind of impact does the fight have on the story and the world. I believe this one isn't as important as the others, but as we'll see, it can be something that helps one fight edge out over another. Let's start with Arkham Origins, and the first boss fight we get is against Killer Croc. I think this is a perfectly solid boss fight, considering it takes place within the first 15 minutes of the game. Any later and it would be a bit disappointing, but where this fight excels is in what it tests you on and what it tutorializes. Killer Croc is taken down by initiating a beatdown, something we were tutorialized on just earlier, so in that sense, this is a good test of knowledge. Then, a lot of his attacks like the charge and the fact you can't counter him, prepare you for the brute enemies that show up later on. Finally, we subdue him by blowing up an explosive barrel he intends to throw at us, which specifically tutorializes how we can use a quick-fire batarang against enemies that are going to throw something at us later on. In the mechanical sense, this is an excellent fight, and I think spectacle-wise it's pretty good too. Impact-wise, I say it passes my vague requirements as it's a great way to end off the Blackgate introduction, and it gets an assassin off of our back. Overall, this fight is great, all things considered. The next boss fight is against Deathstroke. Well, technically Electrocutioner is there, but we aren't counting him for obvious reasons. Deathstroke is a fight that basically lives and dies on its spectacle, and hey, it nails that spectacle harder than most fights in the series. But it's when we get to the impact and mechanics that things start crumbling. Mechanically, this fight tutorializes the martial arts enemies, specifically because he can counter your attacks, just like they can. And what he also tutorializes is the concept of countering a combo, instead of just one attack. Unfortunately, he doesn't test anything in particular aside from your ability to press the triangle button. Much of this fight is a glorified QuickTime event, and while it looks cool, it just doesn't hold up under scrutiny, especially when we see that some of his attacks are one-to-one copies of other bosses. As far as impact goes, I think this fight does well enough, but my main issue is that he is simply dealt with too fast. I mean, this is Deathstroke, the guy who got a whole-ass playable character DLC and cinematic trailer, and he's gone after 5 minutes? Nah, maybe I'm being too nitpicky, but I think in recent years I've come to enjoy this fight less and less, regardless of how cool it looks. Next up is Copperhead, who has an excellent set piece associated with their fight, but the fight itself isn't anything to write home about, especially when, again, we see that mechanically, the different enemies swarming you with someone occasionally piercing through the crowd is another beat from the Ra's al Ghul fight in City. Instead, where this fight succeeds is in the spectacle and the impact. It's impactful because, all things considered, I think Copperhead was the closest to successfully killing Batman. Had she not played with her food so much, she might have won. But also, the spectacle of the fight, with it being a legally distinct Scarecrow section, was a ton of fun, and actually kinda scary at times. Unfortunately, it doesn't test anything new from the player, but when the spectacle and impact are this dialed in, then I can't fault it too much. We then arrive at Bane, which feels like it's in a similar vein to Copperhead, specifically because there isn't much separating Bane from Croc. We stun him to do damage, evade his attacks, but I guess the shock gloves are used so there's a bit of a test, but it's nothing much. Then there's the spectacle, which much like Copperhead is perfection. Battling on the rooftop through a rare instance of the second-person camera, and the impact is high because it's the culmination of our first encounter with the Joker. However, this fight to me is just fine, because it doesn't test us on much that we haven't been tested on already, and many of Bane's attacks can be dodged by just running away. Hopefully the rematch fares a bit better. Then we come to Firefly, and honestly, I think this fight is really lame mechanically and impact-wise, but at least it has a good spectacle. We just sit there throwing glue and batarangs at him, and we can do it efficiently enough that he can hardly move. Sure, moving through the collapsing bridge is fun, and the ending cinematic is dope, but he's just a roadblock in the way of our real goal, which is Bane. After Joker has been taken down, there's no more reason to stop the assassins, and the whole thing with Firefly is that he doesn't know the bounty is off. So it makes it feel like a really big side tangent that's only stakes is the fact that we have more important things to be doing. Moving on to our rematch with Bane, we see that nothing is different aside from the need to use the shock gloves. This means we have to build up a combo on the surrounding thugs and then use the gloves on Bane, which is actually great as it tests your ability to control a fight. Attacking an enemy is one way of doing that, but sometimes avoiding an enemy until there is an opportunity is another way of exerting control. I'd enjoy this fight a lot more if it had better spectacle, and if it wasn't just a large build-up to the main attraction, which is TN1 Bane. This is probably my favorite boss fight in the game because it is against a genuinely intimidating enemy. The stakes are high because he knows our identity, and the mechanics are pretty good too. The fight serves as a test of stealth knowledge, with Bane going down from grates, takedowns from behind, and well, I guess the arena doesn't offer a whole lot more than that, but I do appreciate that in his final phase, we have detective mode jammed, meaning we're forced to not rely on our crutch. I wish every fight in Origins was this good, but alas, you can't win them all. There are a few other boss fights in the side quests and DLC, but I want to focus on the main game because that's what most people are talking about when they compare the boss fights to others in the series. So now, let's move on to Arkham City, which comparatively has fewer boss fights, meaning in some ways it is starting on the back foot. Let's see how it does. The first boss fight in Arkham City is actually quite a ways into the game, and it is against Solomon Grundy. Unfortunately, I think this is mechanically the weakest fight in the game, but the impact and spectacle makes up for it, especially when we consider the fake out at the end. Much of the fight sees us utilizing the quickfire tools, specifically the gel, which is a solid mechanic to implement as it was a new idea in this game. We'll see that quickfire gadgets are incorporated to a lot of the boss fights, but to stay focused, I like that with each phase, Grundy's attacks grow harder and our window of opportunity becomes smaller. This is something many of the fights excel at, and especially when we consider the Origins fights and how Phase 3 Bane is the same as Phase 1, we see an immediate leg up this game has over Origins. A trend you might be beginning to notice by this point is that no boss fight hits all 3 points, and that's because it's really difficult to do, but it can be done, as we'll see with Ra's al Ghul. I think a lot of praise is given to the Mr. Freeze fight in Arkham City, and I don't blame them. However, it does overshadow the Ra's al Ghul fight, which is just as good, even if for different reasons. Okay, so how can it be comparable to Mr. Freeze? Well, it's hard to quantify because one is entirely a test of stealth while the other entirely a test of combat, but we can see that Ra's al Ghul tests us on a few mechanics. First, the use of quickfire gadgets. Second, the ability to dodge, not counter. And third, both at the same time. In between phases, we'll have clones of Ra's to fight, and even have to counter multiple attacks at once, which tests the player's physical dexterity. When moving on to the spectacle, it's as good as it gets, with constant flashes between the dream world and the real world, dodging swords, Ra's in your ear the whole time. It's fantastic. And it's one of the few moments where we see Batman in a daytime-esque lighting, which thematically signifies how he is in Ra's al Ghul's world, and Batman is not in control like he normally is in the shadows. Impact-wise, it's fantastic as we're fighting Ra's in order to save both our life and the Joker's, and the fact that this is also Batman can stand on his principles is great too. I think this is a very underrated fight. Then we arrive at the main attraction. Okay, I know you've heard this fight's praises so many times, so I won't bother retreading too much ground. Mechanically, this fight tests your knowledge of the stealth system and scales with higher difficulties, making it the ultimate test of player knowledge. Spectacle-wise, the fact we can't use any method more than once means we are constantly having to think on our toes, all while avoiding a powerful foe. Finally, we have the impact, which is that we are down to the wire, and Freeze, as far as we know, is the final thing standing in our way. To no one's surprise, this is the best fight in the series. Finally, we arrive at Clayface, who I think is another boss fight that is severely overshadowed by Mr. Freeze. So how does it hold up? Pretty damn good! Mechanically, it tests your ability to counter, dodge, and identify windows of opportunity to use your quickfire gadgets, but otherwise, I'll admit that it doesn't test players as much as both Ra's al Ghul and Freeze do, making it slightly disappointing mechanically. Of course, the impact is everything because it leads to the end of the game, and a satisfying ending at that, and it follows the grand reveal of the old fake Joker gag. But where this fight might slack anywhere is redeemed by the spectacle. Being in the Monarch Theater, an appropriate arena for Clayface, having Clay show up on your body as you take damage, sending Clayface into explosives, oh, and I forgot, fighting with the fucking sword is more spectacle than any other fight in the series. I know it's a seemingly small thing, but the fact Batman has an entire animated moveset for this sword requires so much development time. This fight is a fantastic way to cap off the game, and I absolutely love it. This video is brought to you by chia seeds. Right now there's a big push for protein in the food industry, and it's fantastic because protein is very good for you and it's good for building muscle, but everybody is forgetting about fiber, okay? Fiber is the thing that makes your guts go. And if you have chia seeds every day, I'm telling you, you're gonna be pooping. So do yourself a favor, and if you're up in your protein intake, or if you're just looking for extra fiber, chia seeds are the way to go. I make them every day with a little bit of cocoa powder and honey and a bunch of other stuff, some oats in there too. It's absolutely fantastic. Keep taking care of yourselves, and thank you for watching the video. Well, now that we've identified how good boss fights are based on the parameters set, what's the conclusion? I'd say for as much as Origins has the quantity nailed down, it doesn't match the quality of City. It's not like Origins has bad boss fights, but that City's does take the cake. I mean, Mr. Freeze and Ra's al Ghul alone to me mog so many of the boss fights in Origins, and it feels like even Origins knows that because they reuse ideas from those fights in that game. When Deathstroke uses the same animation as Ra's al Ghul does, when Copperhead's fight is a copy and paste of just one part of Ra's al Ghul's fight, and when TN1 Bane mechanically is a lesser Mr. Freeze, it feels like even the game knows it can't top that. Flat out copying another boss is the epitome of throwing in the towel. Now, I don't think this is the result of lazy developers, but rather that it's genuinely hard to make a good boss fight in the Arkham games, especially when it comes to combat, and even Rocksteady themselves have struggled heavily with them in both Asylum and especially Night. While Origins is good at delivering the spectacle, their fights are so mechanically lacking compared to City, which provides similar if not better spectacle, that I think saying Origins has the best boss fights is a bit of a pity trophy. So I'm left with a final question. Why do people say this? Well, I think the reason is that it's an easy win to give to the black sheep of the series. The reality is, the boss fights in Origins are good, don't get me wrong, but the only thing they excel at is quantity. So, for people who want to give Origins its flowers, they say that it has the best boss fights. It completes a narrative where each game does something the best. Asylum has the atmosphere, City, the story, Night, the gameplay, and well, what do we give Origins? Best boss fights, I guess. But I want to push back against this idea because it doesn't have to be this way. Look, we can still think Origins is a good game without it doing anything the best. For example, does Origins have the best soundtrack? No. Best gameplay? No. Best atmosphere? No. Best character designs? No. But does it do all of those things well, even great? Yes! I could go further with this rant and talk about how I feel that the narrative that people push about this game's boss fights coincides with their desires to pull Origins out of being the underrated Arkham game, but I'll spare you. Instead, I'd rather reflect a bit more on what Origins stands for in the wider context of the series. Sometimes it can be hard to stand out, especially when you have such large shoes to fill. When something like Origins comes out and is just good next to 3 other games that are great, the comparison once again is the thief of joy. I think ultimately that's why the game is seen as underrated. We have people who play the game disconnected from the comparisons and they see that, wait a minute, this is really fun. Then those people want others to experience that, so they call the game underrated, say it has the best boss fights, and even if they are stretching the word underrated a little bit, it doesn't matter because the goal is just to bring the game more love. But the truth is, you don't need to overhype aspects of a game for it to get praise, especially when it's already doing good. A game doesn't need to be the best to be deserving of love, attention, and success. It just needs to be good and the best it can be. And the same goes for you. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next week.